Resident Evil is one of the most storied franchises in all of gaming. Whether you love it or you're a little piss baby who's scared of horror games like me, we all have an opinion on Resident Evil. There's no escaping it. There are even movies and TV shows if video games aren't your thing, but that's a different story for a different video. Over many console generations, this series has been a staple of gaming through its ups and downs. And in this video, I'm going to be telling the story about how the series went from possibly its lowest point back to the very top of the survival horror genre, a genre that might not even exist without it. With its resurgence, a lot of people are new to the franchise, so I thought this would be a good opportunity to make this video, with all these remakes and new games being brought back into the limelight. But to do that, we're going to have to take a trip all the way back to the year is 1996. Seinfeld and the Macarena are taking the world by storm. The Chicago Bulls are about to win their 4th title in 6 years, and in Japan, a little indie studio you might have heard of, what was it called again? Oh yeah, Capcom. They just dropped a game that's about to change the gaming landscape forever. The graphics, the atmosphere, the gameplay, the voice acting.
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right.
All top notch. The game becomes an instant classic, flying off the shelves and causing many stains in the underwear of gamers everywhere. Naturally, this had fans itching for more, and Capcom was eager to give it to them. Possibly a little too eager. Fast forward to Hollaback Girl is inescapable. Revenge of the Sith is released to a reception, and since releasing the first one, the Resident Evil team at Capcom had been busy at work pumping out game after game with basically the same formula. You run around in some claustrophobic environments with tank controls, and shoot zombies while managing your limited inventory. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, but the general public was ready for something new after almost 10 years of the same gameplay. And it was time for Capcom to come up with something fresh. As the game went through different iterations in development, Capcom realized they had something cool with one of them, but it didn't feel like Resident Evil. So they slapped a gray wig on it, called it Devil May Cry, and went back to the drawing board. It can be tough to create something good after this much development hell, but what they came out with at the end of the tunnel was something truly special. Resident Evil 4 is a masterpiece. Even if you know nothing about horror games or Resident Evil, you've probably seen this game before on various best games of all times lists, and for good reason. With this game, they were able to switch up the gameplay, putting the camera over the shoulder, and switching from tank controls to a control scheme that has basically been copied by every third-person shooter since. If you've never played this game, and think it might be too old to go back to because games this old usually don't hold up, I urge you to go give it a try, because this game still feels great to play today. Not to mention how awesomely cheesy the characters and story are.
I have been honored with the prodigious power from the great Lord Sadler. I've been expecting you, my brethren.
No thanks, bro.
With controls that still feel good in 2023, back in 2005 they were revolutionary, and people were in love with this game. Once again, Resident Evil had a genre-defining hit on their hands. And now Capcom had picked up the action ball and decided to keep running with it. But how far is too far? Gangnam Style, 50 Shades of Grey, The Walking Dead, 2012 really was a dark time. I wonder how Resident Evil's doing.
Shit.
Since 4, Capcom has continued to up the ante of action, and let the horror take a backseat, leading to the crescendo that was Resident Evil 6. Fan and critical reception was negative, and people were starting to question if the series' best days were behind it. Was this hate justified? Well, maybe if you guys subscribe and leave a comment asking for it, I might just share my thoughts on that. I know, I suck. I gotta leave some kind of hook though, I'm a YouTuber. Justified or not though, Resident Evil had become somewhat of a meme. With 4 being a big entry point for a lot of new fans who liked the action gameplay, Capcom was now being pulled between the "we want the games to be scarier" crowd and the "we want fun gameplay with zombie heads to shoot" crowd. So with 6 they decided they were going to try to please everyone with the main story and split it between 4 campaigns, with Leon's being more horror oriented, similar to 4, Chris's being action focused, Jake's being something new, and an espionage style campaign with Ada. Unfortunately, when you try to please everyone, you usually please no one, and Capcom learned this the hard way when Resident Evil 6 bombed commercially and critically. I was there. I remember the cultural feelings towards the franchise. In 8th grade I was walking dogs in my neighborhood making my own money for the first time, and I had finally made enough to buy myself a PS3. This was 2013 and the PS3 was towards the end of its life cycle, and I was pretty far behind the rest of my peers in terms of keeping up with the industry. Because I'd been playing games like Kingdom Hearts and Lego Indiana Jones on my sister's PS2, while they were all playing the latest Call of Duty games.
I learned how to fucking shoot a gun, you
fucking riot shield. What else do you want me to
Oh, riot shield! I'm a pussy that use riot shield!
My friend Alex had told me his favorite series of games was Resident Evil, so with an old woman's cash burning a hole in my pocket, I asked my dad to take me to GameStop and purchased myself a copy of Resident Evil 6, because it was the newest one in the series. I told my friend excitedly the next day at school so he'd know we were both spooky game girlies now, but to my surprise his reaction wasn't what I expected. He told me, "I've heard 6 is okay, the way you would tell a friend their new haircut looks different without hurting their feelings." So naturally when I got home I checked what the internet was saying about the game, and general consensus was that Resident Evil had lost the plot. It was a shell of its former self and the fat lady was clearing her throat. The writing was on the wall and it was either time to make a drastic change or let Resident Evil die and leave it with all the other franchises the industry had outgrown. But Resident Evil wasn't ready to throw in the towel yet. It still had one trick up its sleeve. It was time to return to horror. After completing a concept video to show the type of experience they were aiming for with the next entry in the franchise, the Resident Evil team in Japan sent the video to the American team to see how they felt, and with this reaction they knew they were onto something. Next was to create the full game, taking inspiration from things like The Evil Dead, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Noodles? They set out to create the game and bring Resident Evil back to its former glory. But did the game accomplish what it set out to do? Well, to answer that question, I think it's time to take a deep dive into the Baker Mansion to find out for ourselves.
The first thing that's most obviously different from all of the games before it is that 7 is in first person. This is genius in my opinion. When they brought the camera over the shoulder in Resident Evil 4, it allowed for more precise aiming and a change in gameplay, but it also made what was happening in the game feel more like it was happening to you. By bringing this game into first person, they're doing that again, bringing it to its natural next step. A big reason the environment in this game feels so unsettling is because what's happening behind you isn't clear to the player, and you have to turn the camera around yourself the same way you would have to turn your head if you were actually in the situation. In addition to making moment-to-moment gameplay more tense, this also allows them to have scripted segments that used to have to happen in cutscenes seemingly appear in gameplay. So where before you would have cutscenes and gameplay be separated cleanly, now at any time during gameplay a scripted jump scare could happen, and at any time during a cutscene you would have to take control with no warning. This means as long as you're playing the game, you're on your toes, which is great for creating anxious tension for the player. Unless you're in a safe room, you are never truly safe. This is also a great substitution for QuickTime events that were meant to accomplish that tension during cutscenes in the older games.
Now those are the super obvious ways a first-person perspective can make a horror game more scary, but something that seems small but is huge in my opinion is how it affects doors. From the very beginning, Resident Evil has used doors as a way of building tension. First they were used to hide loading screens, but they took this limitation and used it to get you anxious about what could be lurking in the darkness through the doorway. Later in the series they would have characters slowly open doors to achieve this same effect, up until 6 where they had the feature that I actually liked a lot. Okay, hear me out. Where they would have the player go up to a door and press a button to open it, then you'd have to wait for your partner to come up and open the door slowly with you. In 7 what they've done is, instead of making doors something you can just press a button to open, and removing every part of the equation besides the decision to open the door from you, now every door you go through, you need to physically push open. You want to go in there? Alright, stick your face right into the door and push yourself all the way through. It could be a safe room behind the door and you could get a moment to breathe and unclench your cheeks, or it could be a jump scare right in your face. And the only way you're going to find out is to put yourself directly into harm's way. I don't even know if they thought about it this deeply, but if they did, it's an absolute six-head genius play in my opinion. And it had me hesitating more than a few times before walking through doors. Alright, I can hear you saying. So they changed the camera and how doors open. Whoop-de-doo, that's not that big of a change. Okay, kind of rude. I thought I did a good job of explaining why that was a big deal. But if that doesn't impress you, maybe the new engine will. The RE engine, which stands for the Reach for the Moon engine for some reason, was designed specifically for 7 as the developers thought all the other engines out there were trash. Okay, no, not really. They felt creating their own engine would make development more efficient and have the game come across less generic. I'm not usually a big graphics guy, but the games that have come out using this engine have all looked beautiful. I actually had no interest in this series for a long time because scary games aren't my bag, but the look of these games actually intrigued me enough to play them, which doesn't happen to me often. How did they use these new visuals though? I mean, a new engine doesn't necessarily mean a good game. The atmosphere this game is able to achieve is incredible, in the sense that the whole time I was playing, I wanted to stop because I was so scared. Like, I'm just gonna let you sit in this atmosphere and tell me you don't feel uncomfortable. From the moment you walk into the mansion, you can immediately feel this dreadful, dense, creepy atmosphere. Every corner, every dark hallway, every door feels like a new test of your willpower. Directly contrasting this game's graphics with Resident Evil 6's, it's an incredible upgrade. I don't even think 6 is a bad looking game for its time, but 7 and all the RE Engine games have looked truly next gen. It's clear the priority here was getting back to focusing on the most important parts of the experience, and how they could make it as scary as possible, which allowed them to create a really tight, focused experience crammed full of stuff waiting around every corner. And the biggest reason for this is because of how they chose to structure this game's story. So this is the story of Ethan Winters going to a mansion in the South to rescue his wife who's been missing. That's it. Just a dude trespassing in a stand your ground state and some fucked up shit happens. Something so normal down here it wouldn't even make the 6 o'clock news. He shows up to this house in the middle of the woods without contacting any sort of local law enforcement beforehand, and having brought nothing with him but his slacks and a dream. This clues us in that while this guy might have a heart of gold, he's not the most capable and he might be a little dumb. More of a golden retriever than a Rottweiler if you catch my drift. But through the game, we go through this kind of transformation and growth along with Ethan. From being scared and defenseless in the beginning, to a force to be reckoned with by the end, with a fairly sizable arsenal to boot. I also like that we never see his face. It's never really that important to give him one, and it allows us to use our imagination and more easily put ourselves in his shoes. Once in the mansion, Ethan has to deal with a family of crazed zombie people. We find out later why they're like this, but for now all we know is that these people are trying to kill us, have our wife, and are seemingly immune to bullets. There's the father Jack, who we see die multiple times and then he just keeps showing up again. And again, and again. His wife Marge, who's like a mixture of Mr. Fantastic and Spider-Man, and their son Lucas, the evil genius. There's also a fourth member of the family named Zoe, who actually tries to help us escape because she hasn't gone as crazy as the rest of them. I love how the devs were able to use her to keep the story moving in the universe of the game. Instead of having to explain why Ethan just knows what to do next, or giving us stupid waypoints to follow like we're morons, I like that she knows tips and tricks about how to get out, having been stuck there herself, then giving us just enough breadcrumbs to follow that we can figure out what to do by ourselves. As for the baddies, while I love how scary Jack and Marge made the first half-ish of the game, Lucas is the game's best villain for me. The way you find out he's a secret genius building jigsaw-esque traps, and that he loves torturing people, even putting you in one of those traps, which you have to escape by outsmarting him. Unfortunately, I was really disappointed you don't get to fight him at the end of his section of the game. Instead, just another fight with Jack, which feels like the 10th time you've had to do it at this point. I was really hoping I'd have to take out some sort of like giant mech he had built, and then be able to beat his ass once he didn't have his machines and tech to help him. It also doesn't help that this fight with Jack is a pretty weak one, just casually strolling around the arena and shooting the very obvious targets. Lucas is still a great character though, and the way he was taunting us through his little shop of horrors and setting up trap loot boxes for us really stuck with me. Just unfortunate that he didn't have a satisfying conclusion to his story. I think he even dies off camera. Once Jack, Marge, and Lucas are all gone for good though, it's time to either save Mia or Zoe. And while Zoe may have been really helpful through our journey, the goal from the word go has been to save Mia, and I'm not about to just leave her behind. So we give Mia the supposed cure and leave Zoe to die with the rest of her family. Sorry, even if I saved you, you're about to die anyway. Now, riding off on this little boat, we're about to start the section of the game I think is the weakest. Everything that happens on the big boat is just kind of boring, and while it's important to the story to learn about what Mia's been hiding, I think they could have done it in a way that requires less backtracking. And speaking of Mia, I like what they've done with her backstory. Because this is Resident Evil and there had to be some sort of conspiracy or Umbrella Corporation fuckery, Mia is, spoilers, living a secret life as like a hired mercenary / caretaker of a bioweapon named Evelyn. A little girl with crazy telepathy powers and the ability to create the mold monsters we've been dealing with throughout the game. The only thing that was keeping her under control was thinking Mia was her mom. But now that that plan went tits up, Evelyn escaped and is controlling the Baker family, forcing them to act crazy and keep Mia captive. It would have been really easy for them to just make Mia into a football that Ethan is chasing throughout the game with no personality or importance outside of being a plot device, but flipping that on its head and making her a badass capable of holding her own with a machine gun was a nice subversion in my opinion. The reason that boat section really sucks isn't because you're playing as Mia. I actually liked that switch up. It was just all the backtracking and how long it takes. Then there's the quarry section. I think this section's the most forgettable part of the game, and that a lot of people kind of just forget about it. Like, oh yeah, after the boat you go through a quarry that for some reason has a tunnel that leads all the way back into the house. It's not my favorite part of the game, but at least it doesn't overstay its welcome like the boat. In my opinion, I think I would have liked it better if the reveal with Evelyn and Mia being a secret agent had happened in the house somehow. Still have Evelyn be the final boss after a fight with Lucas instead of Jack, choosing between Mia and Zoe, then ending with that quiet boat ride through the swamp. I think you could still even have that flashback segment with Mia on the boat. They could have even made that DLC if they wanted. But as long as you're controlling Ethan, you're stuck on the Baker's property until you finally escape. You could still even have Chris show up at the end too, but instead of rescuing you on a helicopter, maybe he was just watching the whole time. Ready to intervene if he had to, but just seeing how things played out. Feel free to discuss in the comments though. Maybe the die-hard Resident Evil fans feel like this ending fit the characters and tone of the series more. This is just my opinion as someone who's still relatively new to the series. And speaking of this series, because of how successful this game was, Capcom's been on a roll with banger remakes of old games using the RE engine, a sequel that I'm a big fan of, with a 9th entry on the way. After the experience of playing this game for the first time, then going back to the old games and forward with Village, I would actually consider myself a fan of this franchise now. And I'm really excited to see where they're able to take it next. And none of this would have been possible without Resident Evil 7 being such an incredible success. I hope the lesson Capcom has taken from this is that when this series is innovating and doing something new, is when you have moments like this, 4, even with the very first game being revolutionary at the time. So hopefully we keep getting good games in this series. I'm hoping they tie the remakes into the new story as well. And I hope whatever the 9th game is, it's fresh and exciting and keeps me excited for number 10. And hopefully this video got you excited for the next one from me. And if that's the case, consider subscribing. I have no plans to stop making videos in this style in the future, and I'm hoping to branch out into some other types of stuff as well. Thanks so much for watching this far if you're still here, and whatever you do, don't click any of the links in the description.